Welcome back to Following Nicole, where we are on chapter 40. So we've gotten pretty far through this book. And this chapter is the good eye, and it deals with verses 22 through 23 from chapter 6 of Matthew. So I'm going to start us off by reading those verses. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? That's a very poetic verse, actually, because if that light is darkness, how great is that darkness? There's a lot to think about, and Timothy Keller explores that here in this chapter. So, Rich, I was just wondering what your thoughts were on the chapter to kick off the discussion here.
Yeah, so this verse follows the one from last week where we talked about treasure, storing up treasure in heaven. And actually there were some interesting comments on the video where people talked about how Jesus isn't teaching against having money, but he is just teaching about wise stewardship of money. And so I think this verse comes to bear on that discussion a bit. I have a favorite verse, actually, from Jeremiah.
Okay.
Book of Jeremiah 17. The heart is deceitful above all things. Who can... I forget how it finishes, but the main thing is the heart is deceitful above all things. And Jeremiah is pointing out to the people of Israel that our nature is such that we're sometimes unable to recognize what we're doing. And I think that's what this verse is about. It's about, and Timothy Keller explores this in relationship to materialism and accumulation of wealth. And he points out it's very easy for us to see when we do like more gross sins. He mentions adultery, stealing, lying. These things are very clear when we've done them.
Yeah.
There's no real arguing about whether we've done them or not. But this question of storing up treasures in heaven or keeping wealth for ourselves, there's always this sort of argument that comes in, like how much is enough, how much is too much. And even in our context of church community, when measured against the lifestyles that people live in, third world countries, we live pretty well.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think what Jesus is teaching us here is we need to ask for his light, the right perspective, in this area.
Yeah, and to me also this whole chapter highlights the fact that comparing is pretty deadly and very unhelpful in how we interpret the gospel and how we live that out, actually. Because that's, like you were talking about, that scale of like, well, we need to support ourselves, take care of ourselves, all these things. Like, what does that actually mean and what is most important? And I think Pastor Keller here really dives into that and makes us stop and question how exactly does that, like, make us ask the difficult questions. How does that look in our life? And I think it's that spiritual seeking that can never cease. And I know that for us, that doesn't. It's a constant question. But it's so awesome to do that in a context where you don't own anything. But it doesn't negate that, for sure.
Yeah. And, well, in the context of us living together, where we've actually renounced personally all our property,
yes.
That's kind of a moot point. But there remains the question, like, how are we using what God has given us? And this chapter here, this verse here talks about getting the light of Christ into our hearts, and not being blinded by worldliness, by materialism, by chasing after the things of this world. I was somehow reminded of the story of Paul's conversion in the book of Acts, where he falls off his horse, and it says something like scales fell from his eyes. Right? So here's a guy who thought he was doing everything right. In his eyes, he was righteous. He was pursuing heretics, people who were blasphemers, the Christians. But then Jesus confronted him at this moment, and it says scales fell from his eyes, and he suddenly saw the truth, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what we have to seek for, right? There's no set of rules saying, give 10% or I mean, ultimately, we don't have to give everything, but we need to pray for that clarity,
Yes.
for that truth, and believe it can happen. Maybe not in such a dramatic fashion, but if we speak together, we pray together, we seek together, hopefully we come to some sort of common feeling
Yeah.
about how God sees these things.
Yeah, I think seeking truth is so essential because then you do ask the hard questions and it does fight the deadening effect of materialism that is so well pointed out here. And I think what you were talking about, how the heart is the most deceitful thing from Jeremiah, that I think that kind of also equates to just like our emotions and feelings sometimes, and how I think the devil does prey on some things that kind of in their pure form are really good, but then can be easily twisted around just by human nature and materialism, and some of those things that prey upon the most beautiful and pure things that make each of us who we are. So yeah, I thought this was a really good chapter, and it ends with a conversation on accountability. So I was just wondering what you thought of that.
Yeah, I think that's key. And Tim Keller talks about how, the way we sort of seek the perspective of God is by being accountable to one another, because we can easily lie to ourselves, right? But I think if we're accountable with how we spend our money, whether we live in Christian community or not, with other Christians, and say, I spent X on this and this is how much I make, there's a certain corrective that's going to happen, right?
Yes.
If I have to be honest about how I'm using my finances in the light of the gospel with others, that's going to probably inform how I conduct myself.
Right.
So, I mean, ultimately, I think, it's easy in a conversation like this. There's some people who are more aesthetic than others. There's some people who would happily, live on rusks and water, and I'm not one of those.
Fair enough.
And I think, we always need to look to, what are the fruits of the Spirit, and they should be joy in one another, not sort of finger wagging and such. And yet also, joy in simplicity and joy in, the small things in life, and not being extravagant. So
Yeah. So don't let your light go out.
don't let your light go out. All right. Yeah. So much to think about here. I mean, I've actually found this passage probably one of the more confusing ones in the Sermon on the Mount. So if anyone has more insight, feel free to drop it in the old comment section.
Yeah, I feel like this week will be a good comment section.
All right, then. We'll see you there. Bye.